Hi, it's Lauren. Welcome back to my craft room. I'm continuing my 12 days of Christmas, and today is another favorite brand, which is Pretty Pink Posh. And I'm going to be combining some of their Christmas products as well as some of their non-Christmas products to make a Christmas shaker card. So I've already stamped and colored my images. I wanted to focus more on building this shaker card more so than coloring, so I went ahead and did that before I started recording. But let's start with stenciling our background. I'm grabbing a piece of blue cardstock from one of my scrapbook.com smooth cardstock packs, and I'm going to be putting it behind my first layer of snowflakes from the layered snowflakes stencil set from Pretty Pink Posh, just using my mint tape and my glass mat to help keep everything in place. I'm going to start with the darkest color first, which is Prize Ribbon Distress Oxide, and I'm going to add those with the Dome Foam Blender, also from scrapbook.com. I have my second layered stencil here, and I moved into Salty Ocean. And then for my third layer, I'm using Selvage Patina, which is almost the same color as my cardstock, but it's okay. It's subtle, but you can still see it. I wanted the scene to be kind of darker, I guess you could say, more in the evening. So I'm going to add some more Distress Oxide around the top and left and right edges of my paper. So I have a clear block just to help me with not getting ink all over my fingers. And then I'm going to go the other way now with my Distress Oxide. So starting with the lightest, then going into my medium, and then my darkest color. And I'm just trying to create kind of a more dusky scene, I guess you could say, for my background. Once I'm happy with how everything looks, I'll go ahead and set that aside and clean up my glass mat. After stenciling, I'm going to move into my die cutting. So I grabbed this die set. This is called Pine Trees Dies, and I'm going to die cut them so they fit onto my card. So I'm going to do 2 small and 1 medium trees. I haven't broken these up from each other. These are 3 individual dies, but I've left them together because so far when I use them, I just die cut all 3 trees, but they do break apart. And I grabbed my Christmas Slimline smooth cardstock paper pad, and I grabbed some green and brown ink to die cut my trees and the trunks of my trees, but I end up not using the trunks because of the layering onto the card. I didn't need them. I wanted my trees to look snowy, so I grabbed my Cloud Whip by scrapbook.com, and I just have a fine flat paintbrush here, and I'm just kind of painting on the Cloud Whip to my tree. I started off a little light, but I really like the look with a little bit heavier hand with the Cloud Whip, so I'm going to add in some snow to the edges of my tree. So I'm going through just kind of randomly placing it, sometimes going completely across the tree, other times making it look a little more like snows on different layers of the tree. And I'm going to completely cover all of my areas with this Cloud Whip, and then I will grab some chunky white kind of iridescent glitter. And I have an old Fun Stamper's Journey, which is Spellbinders glitter, but I linked down another chunky glitter that you could use, and I'm using just a little tiny spoon that's from Amazon, and I am just layering on some of that glitter onto the Cloud Whip. And I noticed that the heavier I put the Cloud Whip, the more surface area the glitter can stick to. So I didn't get a whole lot of glitter on this tree, but my other 2 trees will have a little more. By the time I got to my 3rd tree, I colored it quite well, but I'm going to do those 2 off camera because it's the same process. So while those are drying, let's do some more die cutting to create our scene. I'm using this die from Pretty Pink Posh called Nature Essentials, and it cuts out a frame and then a bunch of these little borders that you could use. So there's like a tree with leaves, there are clouds, there's grass, there's kind of a off-centered or tilted hill. And I'm going to use the clouds and that little hill piece for snow at the bottom of my scene. So I'm going to use the frame for now, and it's slightly smaller than an A2 size. So I'm measuring it on my glass mat. It's 5¼ by 4 inches. So I'm going to grab my paper trimmer so I can trim down my background to be the same. So I'm going to cut a little bit off the right and a little bit off the left, so that way it is 5¼ and then I will cut some off the bottom so that way it is 4 inches. And these two pieces are going to make up the front and background of my shaker panel. So I need to grab some acetate. These are 5x6 acetate sheets from scrapbook.com. I'm going to grab my trimmer and I'm going to trim it down to be just slightly smaller, like a 1/16 of an inch smaller than 4 by 5¼ And the reason why I do that is so that way I don't have to line up my acetate like perfectly behind my frame. It's okay if it's slightly off, and then I don't have to actually trim anything because it should still be hidden by the edges of the frame. So I'm adding some 1/8 of an inch adhesive to the back side of my frame, and then I'm layering that piece of acetate onto the frame, and that will be the front of my shaker. I'm going to grab some foam adhesive. This is a thicker foam strip that is great for shaker cards. I don't have a brand for what I'm using right now. It was gifted to me, but I do have in my basic supplies list a link to Hefty Doodles foam strips, and those are really great, the perfect thickness for shaker cards. And once I get foam around the edge of my frame, I'm pulling off the release paper, and then I'm going to grab my clay bits. This is the Winter Snowflakes clay confetti, also from Pretty Pink Posh, and I end up finishing off my shaker bits. I was kind of sad. I didn't want to use them all, but you know what? I'm just going to grab some more next time I'm shopping. And I'm using my Misty to help me put my shaker card together. So I went to shake it and I noticed that one of my strips, when I peeled off the release paper, I took off the stickiness. Again, this is not a brand that I know. This was just gifted to me and I'm using it up. So I just grabbed some glue and stuck down my background. So if that ever happens to you, no worries, just add a little glue, it will be fine. So now my shaker panel is done and it's working, and my shaker bits are staying inside. I'm going to start building my background scene onto this panel. So I'm starting with what is the cloud border from that die set, but I am gluing it to the bottom to be my snowy background. Now a lot of these like bumps here on my cloud are going to be covered because of my tree, so that's why I used it, and I'm going to start gluing down my trees. So I'm going to do the two smaller ones first because they're smaller and that way they'll look further away. So I'm doing one on the left and then one on the right, and I'm letting it kind of overlap on my frame so that way my scene feels like it's larger than my shaker frame. And then I will glue on the larger tree, and I'm going to do it a little off-centered so that way I could still see some of my snowflake background peeking out behind my trees. So once those are glued down, I'm going to grab my other kind of background border piece, which is my little like off my slanted hill here. I was gonna say off-centered, but I guess it's kind of off-centered looking. And I'm gonna grab some thinner foam strips now to attach this to the bottom, overlapping the tree. So the trees are kind of behind where I'm gonna be building my critters and Santa onto this scene. So let me grab all of my stamped images and I'm going to adhere them to my card. So I'm going to kind of quickly jump through this. I'm going to show that I add foam adhesive to my images wherever they're going to be touching the trees or the background. So that way the bottoms of all my images are flush with that kind of snowy hill land piece that I glued on. So I am peeling off the release paper after adding foam adhesive behind my Santa, and he's going to go right in the middle. I will glue my polar bear to the left of Santa, and then I'm going to use some wet glue to glue the present down, and the present will be in the bear's hand like he's either giving it to Santa or Santa gave it to him. I have my rabbit that's laying down and my rabbit that's sitting up, and I'm going to squeeze a present in between the two of them. So now that that's done, we can start working on the card base. So I'm going to grab a sheet of red cardstock. This is from the Peppermint E2 smooth cardstock, and I'm going to glue this to a side folding A2 card, which will be top folding once I rotate it for my scene. But since you're only going to see the edges of this red cardstock, I'm grabbing a rectangle die and I'm cutting out the center of it because we don't waste paper here in the craft room. And that way it looks like there's a full sheet of red behind my shaker panel, but in reality, I will have saved that piece to layer behind something else in the future. So I glued down the red frame to my card base, and now I'm gluing on the shaker panel, and that will finish up my card, but I do want to add a sentiment. So I'm going to grab the stamp set called Holiday Scripts stamp set. This is one thing I love about Pretty Pink Posh. I think they have the prettiest script font for their sentiments, and I'm going to use the word joy. So I will stamp this onto actually that extra piece of red cardstock, and I'm going to do it right in the center so that way I could still use it for layering in the future. So I'm going to grab my mini Misty with my Clearly Amazing Matte, and I'm going to put my sentiment right in the middle. Before I stamp it down, I'm going to add some anti-static powder because I'm going to do some embossing. So I will stamp some embossing ink onto my Joy sentiment, and I'm going to use white embossing powder. I thought the white on red would look really pretty and really pop off the card. So I will use my little coffee filter here to help me catch my embossing powder, and I will pour it back inside while I heat up my heat gun and then melt that embossing powder down. Once my sentiment has cooled down, I'm just going to grab a Swiffer cloth, a little dusting cloth here, and pick up the excess anti-static powder. I'm going to take the corresponding die and die cut out my sentiment, and then I will glue this onto the front of my card just using some wet glue and my fine point glue. So using some tweezers, I'm going to glue this to the top right of the card. I felt like because of the way the critters and the images are, that seemed like the biggest open space for my sentiment. So I'm gluing that down. Because there's a lot of texture on the trees, I'm going to hold it down and make sure it really adheres to my card. And that's going to finish off this sweet little shaker card. I hope you enjoyed this process, and if you haven't checked out Pretty Pink Posh yourself, you're crazy, get on it. I will have links down below, not only to where you can purchase them at Simon Says Stamp, but also Pretty Pink Posh's website as well, where they even have store exclusives that you can only get from them. I hope you've been enjoying these 12 days of Christmas and that you've added some fun new things to your wish list. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!